The Seahawks and the Patriots played. The Seahawks winning 29-13. The first thing I want to talk about is Seattle's dominance on the defensive line. Guys like Nwosu, Tank Lawrence, Leonard Williams, who Tank Lawrence and Leonard Williams really didn't make that much of an impact, but it was guys on the interior of the defensive line and guys like Devon Witherspoon, who was an unsung MVP in this, that really made a difference. Blitzing a guy like that and getting to Will Campbell each and every time, who we just learned has actually a torn ligament, really made a change in the game for this Seattle defense. And for the offense, it was just about taking the points, especially in that first half, being up 9-0, taking those field goals instead of going for it on fourth down and being aggressive like we see out of coaches like Dan Campbell, Matt LaFleur. You could go on and on about these coaches that just don't take the points. Sean Payton in that AFC Championship game maybe wins the game if he's just taking the points instead of going for it on fourth down with a guy like Jarrett Stidham. There's a lot I want to talk about with this game, but let's talk about the Super Bowl MVP before we dive into a little deeper conversation about both quarterbacks that played this game. Kenneth Walker III. He had 135 yards on the ground. He didn't have a touchdown, but he really made an impact in this game and really was the guy that broke out and made it so that the offense didn't have to throw the ball each and every time. Darnold had 38 attempts, which I thought was a whole lot for a quarterback that you may trust a lot, but against a good defense, you weren't going to want him throwing a lot. Kenneth Walker took that nerves off of the offense and really cemented himself as one of the best running backs in the league and a guy who's going to enter free agency and probably get paid the big bucks, because Seattle's going to want to run this team back. Even with the loss of Klint Kubiak, who we'll be talking about later, going to the Raiders, he's going to be gone and he's not going to be the general of this offense anymore. It'll be someone else, but that having an all-pro wide receiver like JSN, having a guy like Kenneth Walker III, who had a breakout year and is probably going to continue on that same trajectory, you have a guy who has cemented himself as one of the best players on your team and could for years to come. The Seahawks actually really dominated this game, and I want to really dive deeper into it because on the defensive side, we saw one of the best performances leading up to a Super Bowl from the defense and in the Super Bowl. I understand they gave up a lot of points to the Rams, but who didn't at this point? And against the Niners, they shut them down completely. And then against the Patriots, having that dominant performance like they did, I understand that the other three defenses that played the Patriots also had a dominant performance in the Chargers, in the Texans, in the Broncos. Yes, the Patriots had a lot of bad or really, really great defenses that they had to face leading up to the Super Bowl. But this does not excuse the fact that Seattle was even more dominant than I believe all three of those teams. One thing I really want to get into is Klint Kubiak, who will now be going to the Raiders and be their head coach. Now we expect Francisco Mendoza to go to the Raiders and be the general of that offense. I really like this Raiders team. If they can get it together, they have Max Crosby who commands the defense, and as long as he's on the team, that defense will be good for years to come. On the offensive side, guys like Ashton Genty, who silently had a pretty good year. You have guys like Brock Bowers. You have an offensive line that needs work and a receiving core that needs work. But I'm sure after watching this year, JSN go from a guy who was just over 1,000 yards to having over 2,000 yards when the postseason had ended, that someone will elevate in that offense that we didn't expect before. And of course, you have the rest of the draft to figure that out, to build your team. The problem is being in a division with the Chiefs, with the Chargers, with the Broncos. These are all teams that we believe next year could be even better, and it's reflected in those Super Bowl odds next year, where the Broncos lie in the top 5 and the Chiefs and Chargers lie with the same odds and in the top 10. I think that the Raiders are going to have a tough time getting out of this division, but I do think that next year should be a building block year. When you have that young whiz coach that comes in as a first-time head coach, you want to have the building blocks to go somewhere else. With this team, this division could be wide open, but like I said, there's just so many good teams that are in it. So use this as the building block. If you happen to make the playoffs, that is a massive success. But for me, Klint Kubiak, if he can be the play caller, and that is what they ask him to do, He doesn't have to manage what's going on in the defense or manage the drama. If they just ask him to play call, I believe that Kubiak was one of the best play callers I have ever seen throughout this entire playoff, and especially in the current year we're in. He outcalled a guy like Sean McVay in that Rams game and was able to get this team way farther than I thought they would be. I'll talk about it a little more later in my Darnold rant, but this offense really isn't that dynamic if you really think about it. They have the run game, and then they can beat you over the top. They were never playing in the middle of the field. They weren't good with short yardage plays. This offense was limited. It had such a limited capacity, and I do think that they matched up with the right teams to make this Super Bowl run happen, but getting that 1 seed as well was crucial to where we are right now. Let's move on. I want to talk about Sam Darnold. There's a lot of people that are coming out today, yesterday, immediately after the Super Bowl, and saying, man, the Vikings made such a mistake. They made such a mistake letting Sam Darnold go. First of all, you're late on that take. That take should have happened after the second Rams game when Darnold showed up and balled out. But on top of that, you were just completely wrong because that had never been your take. You had the opposite take. And so did I at the end of the Vikings' regular season last season and after their postseason loss. This is what happens every time. We act like we knew things that no one knew, the takes that no one had, but they should have been obvious because Sam Darnold won 14 games last year. The thing is that the only person that knew what was going to happen here, to me, is Kyle Shanahan, who called him the next Steve Young when he was backing up Brock Purdy. Now, if you ask yourself, would the Niners rather have Sam Darnold or Brock Purdy? My answer is Brock Purdy, and it will be for a while. I think the recency bias will wear off. This guy didn't even have a good Super Bowl. He had a good game against the Rams, but that Rams defense after Week 11 was historically bad. So if we let that wear off and we actually simmer down, we know that Brock Purdy is a better quarterback, but maybe he was the Steve Young. And maybe Sam Darnold was that Joe Montana. I don't personally think so, but that's what most people are coming out today and acting like. After that Lions loss in the end of the regular season, everyone said, this is why Darnold can't show up in big games. He never shows up. And then after the playoff loss, we had the same take. He sees ghosts out there. He never shows up for big games. And this is why this is going to continue to happen. Then he goes to the Seahawks after the Vikings win 14 games with Sam Darnold. But their belief was, and Kevin O'Connell's belief, this was Kevin O'Connell's decision, by the way, to have J.J. McCarthy come in and replace Sam Darnold, hoping, being optimistic, that this would be a... Now, if you were to ask me, is J.J. McCarthy going to be better than a 14-win Sam Darnold, who could have been the MVP if it weren't for a slide at the end of the year? Yes, I would have said that Sam Darnold would have been the better option. But for the Vikings, using their third overall pick and trading up for this guy, this was who they wanted. This was exactly who they thought was going to lead their franchise. And they didn't want to leave that on the table the same way that the Niners did with Trey Lance. So what they wanted to do was have this guy, who they thought was really good, just be given a chance. And they didn't want to pay Sam Darnold an outrageous amount of money to stay with them. So he gets shipped off to the Seahawks, and before the season even starts, most people, including myself, had the Seahawks as third or second in the division. Did not have them as the 1 seed, which definitely helped them in the playoffs. Did not have them winning 14 games like they did. So for anyone to say that they knew Sam Darnold was going to be like this, you clearly did not. Especially even after the Lions game last season. You said after the Rams game, the first one in the season, Oh, well, that's what Sam Darnold is. He throws 4 interceptions, and that's why his team loses. So you have all these controversial takes, but no one knew that Sam Darnold was going to do what he did this year. And you have to stop kidding yourself that if you were the owner or the GM of the Vikings, that you wouldn't want to take a shot on J.J. McCarthy, who you spent so much on. That was the choice that they had to come to. Was it worth keeping Sam Darnold, especially with his history and what he looked like in the last 2 games that he played for you? The answer to that is he looked terrible. And we all came together and said, Sam Darnold will never win the big game. The reason he went to Seattle and he finally won the big game was dominating a Rams defense that's historically bad, as I've mentioned, and dominating 2 other teams, one with a depleted defense, and the other where you threw a 50% completion rate, no touchdowns, and it just looks great for you, apparently. Apparently, you're better than half of the quarterbacks in the NFC. Everybody's waking up this morning and saying, well, I would take Darnold over this guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy. Let's wait until he doesn't have Klint Kubiak next year. Let's wait until he doesn't have Kevin O'Connell under his belt. Let's see what it looks like when the offense can't get anything going and it's in Sam Darnold's hands to run the table against a great defense. Ask yourself, as much as we will criticize Drake May, and I will be critical of him coming up, would Sam Darnold have ran through the Chargers defense, which was top 5, Houston's defense, which was the best in the league, and the Denver Broncos defense to get to the Super Bowl? Do you think that in one of those games he would have had a massive turnover that would have flipped the script and the whole narrative for this Seahawks team? Would we wake up today and be putting him over guys like Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, and even putting him in contention and near a guy like Matthew Stafford? The answer is no. It's a resounding no. And for you to say that you knew this was going to happen, for you to say that it is right for the Vikings to fire Mensa when all he did was draft well and he was the guy that helped you get Sam Darnold, it's outrageous. And it's something that you don't have a lot of legs to stand on. So for anyone in the media today that is going to lunge at Sam Darnold and say, I knew you were great, you did not.